Hi everybody, Scott Stanfield here. Let's walk through some examples using intents in Android. To start with, I created a real simple application here that just has a single activity. I renamed the activity to main activity 1 and his layout to activity main 1. In my activity main, I set up a really simple user interface, just some text view at the top that says result will go here, an edit text to enter some data, and then 3 buttons. Note on this edit text, I added in a hint. That's this Android hint right here. It says enter data to send. And this is just some text that's going to be displayed if the user hasn't entered any data. As soon as you click in that field to enter data, you'll see the words enter data to send go away. Let's set up a main activity too. So I'm going to say new activity. I'm just going to use an empty activity for this. Main activity 2. And inside here, in his activity 2 main, let's just put some text on the screen here and a little button here. So this is going to say, first of all, I'm in activity 2, and then we have an OK and cancel button. We're not going to use those to start with. We'll use those in a minute when we actually pass data back. But for right now, where it says I'm activity 2, I want to replace that with any data that we might send in. So main activity 2, we're not going to do anything for the moment. We'll come back. Let's take a look at main activity 1 and put some code in him. We're going to start simple. I'm going to hold on to the result view at the top here and be able to get it. We won't be using that right now, but I figured I might as well put it in for starters. I set up a little helper function here. This is an extension function on int called onClick that's going to do our find view by ID and then set an onClick listener all in one little bundle. So I can down here say RID button 1 onClick, boom, do this as my click action. Just makes things a little cleaner, I think. So here's where we're actually going to do something interesting. I'm going to first of all create an intent. And this is a real simple intent. I'm not passing any data to start with. I'm going to pass in the activity as the context we're coming from. So we're basically going to say I want an intent to launch this activity in this context. So it's going to be the same application that the current activity is actually present in. So then we'll call start activity, passing that intent in. And that should take us over to the second activity. Let's go ahead and take a look at our manifest real quick just to see what's going on there. And inside here, source main Android manifest. Let's set our backup attribute so we get this stuff to go away and then ignore the Google app indexing. And there we go. So we'll see down here we have main activity 1. That's the first one we created. And he has an intent filter that says action is main, categories launcher. So this says put him either on the home screen or in the application list. So this is basically an application entry point for you. You'll start at main activity. Activity 2 here, it says he has an empty body. I'm going to go ahead and leave that empty body for now. We're going to be adding in some extra stuff into him a little bit later, some other intent filters. Let's go ahead and run this. So here we are inside our main activity. I'm going to hit this explicit intent button. That's that button 1. And it should take us to activity 2. Boom, I'm in activity 2. Excellent. If I hit back, boom, I go back to that first activity. Now let's pass some data. We're just going to type some data in here and pass it on that explicit intent. So what we have in our main activity 1 is this result view. Let's go ahead and add in a data view. Just paste that in there. So I'm going to go and get the data field. I'll just call it data view. And then I want to modify how I create this intent. So I'm going to come in here and paste in an intent. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the old one. And I'm going to the same place, main activity 2, but I'm going to use this apply block to initialize it. So I'm calling put extra, passing in an extra called data, and a string value that I'm just retrieving from that data view. So boom, I'm going to have some data on there. Call start intent activity the same way that I did before. Let's go to activity 2 and actually pull the data out of there. So to get the data from the intent, I'm just going to call intent. That's going to be the intent that launched this activity, and call get string extra on him, passing in data. If that comes back null, I'm just going to use the string no data as the data that I got retrieved. Let's go ahead and put that on the screen. Boom. So I'm going to call find view by ID to get the data field for this activity and set his text to be the data that came in. Hopefully we'll see that coming up okay. Just to make sure, I'm going to come in here and say, yep, his field is data. Okay, good thing to check. Now that we've got that, we should be able to get the data and see it on the screen. Let's try running that. So here's our screen. I'm going to go ahead and type in Scott, hit explicit intent, and now we'll see Scott is showing up in that data field inside the second intent. Now let's have OK uppercase that and send it back, and cancel will just cancel. So back in main activity 1, we need to tweak the way that we're going to be launching. Instead of calling start activity, we want to call start activity for result. And we need a couple pieces of data for that. First of all, I'm going to define a constant. I'm going to use a companion object in Kotlin, which is a object instance or a singleton that's available for all instances of main activity. So it's essentially similar to static fields or static methods in Java. So I'm defining a constant here called data request, and this number can be anything you want it to be. I'm just using 42 because I'm a Douglas Adams fan. And then we're going to tweak our start activity call to be start activity for result, passing in the intent and that constant. This will launch into the main activity 2, and when we come back, we will call the onActivity result function. So let's add him in there. Here's an onActivity result. He has the request code coming in to say which response we're handling. There might be multiple places in your activity where you call start activity for result. So because everything comes back to this one function when you return, you need to know which request you were actually making. The result code is either going to be OK or canceled, and then you might have an intent passed back. We're going to call that data. So inside here, we're first of all going to take a look at which request it was, and then based on the result code, do something. So result code is result OK. I'm going to go ahead and print get whatever the extra was from that data. So I'm going to assume that the other guy is sending back result info on that intent. I'm going to add in a little else here and have it just say text equals canceled if they canceled from there. Once we've actually handled this, we're going to return. If we don't handle it, we're going to go ahead and let the superclass take a shot at handling it. So this is what we need to do in our main activity, the guy who's launching that intent. Let's go over to our main activity 2 and set up the handling of the data there. I'm going to start by pasting in that same little helper that I had for onClick. I could have created a common superclass, but hey, I'm being lazy right now. And then let's handle the OK and cancel buttons. So there's our OK and cancel button handlers. If the user hits OK, what I'm going to do is call set result so that we can pass the data back to the caller, passing in result OK, saying, hey, the user hit OK, and then creating a new intent to hold some data. You could actually use the intent that came in if you wanted to. I typically like to create a new intent so it's a clean piece of data coming back. I'm going to initialize it by putting in that result info extra, and the data that we're going to return is the data that came in, so what we got off the extra, and I'm just going to convert it to uppercase. So I'm going to take that, plug it into result info. Once I have that result set, I'm going to call finish to say go back to the caller. If the user hits cancel, I'm just going to set the result to result canceled and go back to the caller. So let's see how that works. Let's plug in some data. I'll say hello, all in mixed case there. Hit explicit intent. That now came over here, passed in the data. I'm going to hit OK. And when we come back, we'll see that the result came back as hello in all uppercase. If I went in now and hit cancel, it'll come back and just say canceled. So that's an example of how you can get data into a target activity and data coming back. Now let's take a look at using an implicit intent. So I'm going to go back over to main activity, and let's set up a handler for button number 2. So this guy is going to say when button 2 is clicked, I'm going to create an implicit intent and start an activity. Now, one thing you want to be careful about, when you use an implicit intent, it has to go off to the package manager and ask the package manager to see where it should end up routing. If the package manager sees exactly one hit, it'll send the request there. If the package manager sees more than one hit, it'll ask the user to disambiguate. But there's a case that a lot of people forget to handle, and that's a case where maybe there isn't anything registered to handle this action. For example, maybe there is no camera application installed. That one's pretty unlikely because it's pretty likely that most phones have have a camera application, but there might be other ones that aren't installed, or maybe the users deleted all their camera applications. So it's a good idea to check up front to see, can I get to the camera application or wherever I'm trying to go? So in this particular example, I'm going to create an implicit intent to view something. And it's going to view something of type JavaDude data. So this is my private data. So maybe I have a suite of applications that all use JavaDude data. So some other application would have an intent filter saying, I handle JavaDude data. And the JavaDude data I handle is 42. And then he knows what to do to look up data 42. To see if we can actually go there, we can call intent resolve activity, passing in the package manager. Package manager, there's a getter for him called get package manager, surprisingly enough, that's going to return the package manager instance. And intent resolve activity will tell you what activity is going to handle it. Typically, all you care about at this point is if it's null or not null. So I'm going to say if it's null, I'm going to report to the user, sorry, I can't do that right now. You might want to use this as a little test up front to see, hey, can I get somewhere? And if I can, enable the button on the screen. If I can't, disable or remove the button. If I was able to resolve that, I'm going to go ahead and call start activity to go there, or start activity for result, depending on what we want to use. So let's first of all try this without having anything registered. So I don't have any other application set up to handle JavaDude data, and this particular application doesn't have any intent filters registered for that yet either. So we'll run him, and when I hit implicit intent, we'll see that little toast pops up. Sorry, I cannot process the request as nothing handles JavaDude data. Toast, something I'll just mention really briefly right now, is one way to communicate to your user. We'll look at other ways later on, but this is just a really simple way to pop up something that the user can't interact with. They'll just get the message, it'll stay up for however many milliseconds you specify, or a long time or short time. Generally use length long or length short, depending on how long you think the message is. So you'll call toast make text, passing in the activity context, the text that you want to display, the time you want to display it for, and then you call show. And then this just gives that little message for the user. Now let's go ahead and define a activity 3 that will handle this. So first we'll create it. So underneath Java, new activity, empty activity. I'll call it main activity 3. And I'm not going to do anything special with the code itself. I'm just going to go to his layout and just change this guy to be a text view. And his text, oh, come on, will be in activity 3, something like that. So we'll just see that on the screen. It looks something kind of like that. What we will do is go to our manifest and enhance him a little bit. So we'll see right now we have activity 3. Let me just move him after the other guys here. I'll just move them down. Activity 2, I'm not going to end up having any intent filters, so I'm just going to close them off. But activity 3, I'm going to drop in an intent filter. So let's just go ahead and paste that in. And we'll see that this guy is saying that my action is view, my category is default, and I'm handling JavaDude data. So this is the same MIME type that we're passing in the activity. Now note that there's an error message on here saying missing URL. This is so that if you have your application set up for Google App Indexing, your application can participate in the Google search function. So if somebody went to the Google application and did a search, and it went to your application to get data, and your application returned a URL, you would put that URL in your intent filter so that the Google search would know who to actually invoke to present that data on the screen when the user taps on the result. We're not going to use that, so I'm just going to Alt-Enter on that guy and say add suppress, boom. Then we don't have that message anymore. So this should handle that intent coming in. Let's go ahead back to activity 1, take a look at him again. We're passing in the MIME type, putting an ID in there, and let's actually go ahead and run this and see if we actually get there. So if I hit implicit intent on this guy, now somebody handled it and we're in activity 3. So it actually matched. We could also say intent.getExtraID and do something with the ID, but I'm not going to get the data off there. We've already seen how to do that. Let's see if I have multiple activities registered that will handle that intent. So let's create one more here. I'm going to say new activity, empty activity. We'll call it main activity 4. I'm going to go over to the manifest and let's move main activity 4 down here. And I'm going to copy this intent filter so that we have the exact same intent filter. And let's see what happens when we run it this time. So now when I hit implicit intent, we get this little deconfliction dialog that says open with intents, use a different app. And what it'll do is it'll tell you the application name and the application package ID. You could also, instead of having the package ID, you could pass in a label. So let's set that up real quick. If I go back into my manifest on these activities, I can give it a label. And let's say that this is the 4th activity. Why did I get so verbose on those? And we'll come up here and we'll say this is the 3rd activity. And then this one here, oops, I forgot the second one. 2nd and 1st. And you can use any text you want on that. Typically, you're going to want to extract that out into your strings.xml though. Let's try running that now. So when we hit it now, boom, we get actually a little bit more information here describing exactly what you're going to go with. So open with, this is the 4th activity. Wow, that was a horrible name to put on there. So maybe I should have just called it 4th activity. So I can open with 4th activity or open with 3rd activity. So now we have a little bit nicer descriptive text for the user there. This one I'll say, okay, let's just once go to the 4th activity. And boom, we're in the 4th activity. Let's come back, do it again. This time I'm going to click on the 3rd activity. Boom, I'm in there. Now what happens if I say use always? So the 3rd activity, I'm going to say always. Now I'm in the 3rd activity. I'll come back out, hit it again, and I always come back to the 3rd activity. But what if I want to change that? So in this particular example, I'm going to need to go to the application info for that guy. And I just paused the video and added that application to my home screen so you don't get to see my wonderful list of crazy applications that I have installed. What I'm going to do here, I'm using Microsoft's launcher. I'm going to long press on him, and he gives me this little pop-up menu here. Now, different launchers will give you different menus. Sometimes you'll long press and just drag up here, and it'll give you a thing that says App Info. But what I'm going to do here is hit the little Info button, and that takes me to the application info page for this activity. And inside here, underneath Advanced, there's an option here that says Open by default, some defaults set for this application. So what I'm going to do is go into there, and I can hit clear defaults. Now it says no default set. And when I go back to my home screen and run them again, if I hit implicit intent, now it asks me again. And that's a really important thing to know how to do, just in case you accidentally say always and change your mind, or you install a new application and want to go to the new application. Now, one more that I want to point out is, just in case you're interested in seeing it go to Chrome, for example, which is an existing browser, let's go back to main activity. And I'm going to paste in a handler for button 3. Now this time, the intent is going to be action view, same action that we used before. I'm going to initialize it by saying set data and type. So passing in data and type here, instead of just setting the type, up here I only set the type, I'm going to set data and type together to whatever URL that I pass in the data view. I'm going to parse it into a URI, and then use that URI and text HTML as the MIME type. Then I'm going to call start activity, and the system should be able to say, hey, who can handle this one? So let's go ahead and run this one. So now we're going to enter in a URL. Let's say http://javadude.com. And let's actually change that to a lowercase http because I think that that will be a problem. And let's hit browse web. Boom. We go over to Chrome and my website comes up there. Now you can set up an intent filter for specific websites. Let's go ahead and set one up for javadude.com. I'm going to go back to the manifest, and on this last activity, I'm going to add a second intent filter. So either this matches or this matches. Now again, I'm going to have to do the same kind of thing here for that warning, make him go away. And we'll see in here I'm saying view data scheme HTTP host JavaDude and MIME type text HTML. So if all three of those match, I'll be able to intercept that. So let's try running it now. And I'm going to type in, let's go lowercase on him, http://javadude.com, and we'll hit browse web. Now notice here that we have a conflict. Chrome can handle it, and I can handle it. So I have to choose who I want to handle this, either me or Chrome. So if I hit me just once, boom, we come into the fourth activity. Now, if instead I picked a different website, like let's say IBM.com, and hit browse web, we immediately go to Chrome because that doesn't match. The only way that I'm considered is if I match http://javadude.com. So what's nice about this is you can swap in different browsers, you can swap in different functionality and so forth. You have to be careful though. If you really want to handle the data the way you want to handle the data, that's when you want to use an explicit intent and make sure that you always are staying inside your application. If you want to allow the user to swap out functionality, that's the time to use an implicit, but only use an implicit intent if you want the user to be able to swap out functionality.